Hi guys, welcome to Crinkles Corner. This is my very first episode of many to come, hopefully. We'll be talking about strange phenomenons, strange happenings, sightings, crime cases, mysteries, all kinds of different topics. So if you have something that you're kind of interested in and hearing more about, please drop it down below in the comments. I'm always curious to know what others are interested in and want to research. So today's case is something that I've always been so interested about. I've always done so much research on it. I've watched so many documentaries and films and read so many books and have my own experiences with this topic. And it is always so interesting to me how this world works and what all we're living amongst. Tonight's topic will be the case of Betty and Barney Hill, which is the first ever documented alien abduction. A little bit about Betty and Barney Hill. They both live in New Hampshire. They are a married couple. Betty is a social worker. She has that very headstrong personality, independent woman, but has those strong characteristics where she kind of stands her ground. And Barney is more no nonsense. He is a civil rights activist. He's a World War II veteran, and he is a postal worker living in New Hampshire. And this story takes place in September 17th of 1961. So let's begin. So on September 17th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were discussing maybe going on a trip, kind of like an impromptu honeymoon since they hadn't gone on one and they've been married for some time already. So Barney's like, I think it's time. Let's go on an impromptu honeymoon, and asked Betty where she would like to go. Betty was like, I've always wanted to visit Niagara Falls. That would be beautiful. And Barney's like, let's do it. That is a quick weekend trip. We could definitely drive there and back. It'll be nice to just get away. I had to bring along Dulcie, their little dog, a little Dachshund. And they start heading out towards Niagara Falls. On their drive, they stop by Vermont, Toronto, the 10,000 Lakes area, and they make it to Montreal. While in Montreal, they decide to stop at a diner to get some food and then get directions so they can start heading back to New Hampshire. They get back on the road, and Barney realizes that he took a wrong turn somewhere because these directions he got were in French, and neither Betty or Barney speak French or know how to read it. So they took a turn and it wasn't the right one, and they're kind of lost at the moment. And so Barney decides, like, okay, let's just keep driving until we find a hotel that will take Dulcie, their dog, in. So they keep driving, and as they're driving, a newscaster comes on the radio and announces that a tropical storm is coming and it's headed towards New Hampshire. So at this point, Barney's like, okay, let's just drive straight home. That way we won't get caught up in the storm. It won't hold us back, and we can make it back home before it gets too dangerous on the roads. So now their plan is to just go straight home and just drive through the night. So while they're driving, it's kind of like a peaceful night. Like, there's not very many cars on the road. Wouldn't even think that a tropical storm is coming because it is really calm. You can see the stars in the sky, and it's just really chill. As they're driving, Betty's in the passenger seat, and she looks up at the sky to just kind of admire the stars and notices that there's this like blinking light in the sky. She mentions it to Barney. She's like, what is that? And so Barney kind of glances over and he's like, a satellite signal. Betty just kind of thought it was odd, but continued to look at this blinking light in the sky when she notices that it is moving erratically. Like, it's going this way and this way very quickly. So she's like, that is not a satellite. But being Barney, who has that like no nonsense mentality, he kind of just shakes it off when they notice that this light is actually coming towards them. So Barney's like, I need to pull over and get a better look at what this is. Decides to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway, wants to get a better look at it through the binoculars that they had. So Barney pulls over, grabs the binoculars. He gets out of the vehicle and kind of walks towards the back and starts to look up at it, notices that this object is rather large. So as Barney's watching this object, he gets a sense of fear that runs through his entire body. I don't know if he got some kind of telepathic message or saw something or heard something. Fear just struck this man. He runs back to the car. He gets in the car and he looks over at Betty and he's like, we have to go before we're taken. Now Betty's panicking. She's like, what do you mean? What did you see? What did you hear? What is over there? Like, she was just asking all the questions in a panic, and Barney just did not want to say anything. He was laser focused on this road. His foot was on that gas pedal. He was just trying to get home as soon as possible. As they're driving down Route 3, they start to feel their car like vibrating, like if something is hitting the back of the trunk of the car. It's just moving, and they're both kind of freaking out, and Barney is just continuing to drive. Now, this is where their memory a bit of memory loss, and they can't pinpoint exactly what happens next. They remember this happened, but they don't remember why or who or just like what the meaning and the point of what happens next. They come to a roadblock, and there's these like military style looking humanoids. They're dressed in like military style suits. Barney even describes one of them as like having a scarf on with it draped over his shoulder. There's a roadblock, and these humanoid figures are telling them to go to the side or pull over here or drive this way. For whatever reason, this part of their night is a little murky. We don't really know what the meaning of that roadblock was. So they finally make it home, and it is now 5 a.m. and their original ETA was 3 a.m. But with everything that happened, there's some time there that was missing, and it's gonna turn out that they don't really know what happened with these missing hours, because from when they saw this object to Barney getting out of the car, it didn't take up that much time. It was a very quick occurrence. And so there is gonna come some missing memories, missing time that is unaccounted for, that they don't remember what happened. They get home and they're kind of like in a state of shock. They don't know what just happened. They don't know if it was real. They're just kind of like trying to wrap their minds around it. They're sitting at the kitchen table and they decide, you know what, for like our own sanity, let's just go to separate rooms and draw what we saw. So they go to separate rooms and they draw what they saw. They come back together, show each other their drawings, and they realize these drawings are very similar. We definitely saw the same thing. They're trying to just process everything that they just, went through. And Barney decides to hop in the shower. And so Betty follows and she gets in the shower after Barney. And while Betty's in the shower, Barney decides to go out to the car and just retrieve their belongings from the trunk. Betty lets Barney know not to bring them inside and just leave them out on the front porch. And so Barney does that. Barney, as they're, still in their home, trying to process everything after they've taken a shower, Barney mentions to Betty, like, let's not ever talk about this again. Let's not tell anyone what we experienced, what we saw back there. And Betty's like, I'm not agreeing to that. No, I have to tell someone about this. It's gonna drive me crazy. I have to speak to someone about this. And so Betty decides to call her sister, because she knows her sister will be understanding, and her sister had something of a similar experience in the past as well. So she thinks my sister's a good person to talk to. And so she calls her sister, and her sister's like, oh my gosh, like, you have to talk to this military man who works for space projects, space engineers, something with space, and he was an ex-military man. You have to talk to him about what you experienced and what you witnessed. And so Betty gets his contact. Betty's talking to him and telling him everything that she saw, this ex-military guy, and he directs her to conduct some experiments. And so she grabs a compass and she goes outside, and now it's raining. And those things that Barney had left on the porch have been brought into like the hallway area, so they're no longer outside. But Betty walks out and conducts these experiments that this ex-military man is telling her about. She has a compass in her hand and she walks towards the back of the car where they were feeling that vibration while they were driving on the road, and she notices that there's these like white powdered prints on the back of her car, like if someone had like laid hands on the trunk and put their little like prints all over the back of her car. And so she decides to place the compass on top of these like powdered prints, and she notices that the compass is going crazy. It's just going in circles and circles and circles, and it's not pointing at one direction. And this starts to freak Betty out, and she just decides to stop with the experiments for now, and they call it a night and they go to bed. But it's unsettling. It's, you know, I don't think either of them are getting a full night's rest. And in the following days, they're both kind of feeling like something is wrong. This isn't normal, and it's causing stress and anxiety. Betty starts having these dreams that are very vivid. Her dreams are getting more and more specific. So she decides to write down everything that she's seeing in her dreams. And at the same time, Barney is kind of becoming removed from it all. He's become quiet and just not himself. This is definitely causing some stress and anxiety for both of them. And Betty notices that at night, while Barney is sleeping, he starts grinding his teeth, which is something that he's never done before. And every time that they decide to speak about what happened to them, Barney gets like a sensation that runs through his body. And I don't think it's like one of those good sensations. I think it's one of those sensations that comes with fear. Betty, the following days, decides like, let me write this letter to the director of the aerial phenomenon and explain to him all the vivid dreams that I've been having, how I always feel like someone's watching us, like we're being followed, and it's just uneasy feelings. And explain to him that all this began 3 days after September 19th, after they witnessed this flying object in the sky. The director then goes on to request a meeting with both Betty and Barney to get their side of the story, to hear them out and get more details and try to figure out what is happening. So while they're meeting with this director of the aerial phenomenon, he recommends that they both go and try to see a psychiatrist, someone that kind of specializes more in hypnosis. Decide to go and find a psychiatrist, a neurologist, someone that specializes in hypnosis, to see if they could help figure out what happened with this lost time, to help them recover these memories. So now we're gonna jump over to the whole hypnosis part of their story. I feel like this is a very interesting part of their story because you don't hear of many people visiting hypnosis often. Like, I feel like it's important to the story because this is when things start to come to light. We start getting pieces and bits of what happened to Betty and Barney Hill, what they experienced, what they saw, things that Barney was going to erase from his mind and completely forget about. From Barney himself when he was under hypnosis and him talking about what he saw, and you hear the like emotions that Barney is feeling, and he's in fear of his life. He's scared, he's screaming and almost crying because it's so strange that he knows nothing about. They start telling them about that whole entire night and everything that went on. And he decides to put them under hypnosis, but separately. So they'll have separate appointments and separate meetings, and they'll just go in there, try to find the missing memories and the missing time. Betty goes under hypnosis. She starts, one of the more important sessions, meaningful sessions, I believe, is when Betty is under hypnosis and she starts describing that when she was on that spacecraft, that before she even got on the spacecraft, let's backtrack a little bit. Both her and Barney were standing in this field, and this humanoid being walks them up this ramp and into this spaceship. And Betty would go on to describe the inside of the spaceship. It was kind of sterile, and this is when Betty starts talking about this map that she saw when she was on board this spacecraft. Stars kind of that she saw. The psychiatrist asked Betty to draw this out for him, and so Betty goes on and draws the map as she had seen it on the spacecraft. This map consisted of prominent stars that connected to one another with solid straight lines. So like a star, straight line, a star, straight line, a star. This map would then go on to describe the travel pattern. This was their route. This map was reportedly shown to her by the leader of the alien beings, which would go on to reveal their journey. It would become a cornerstone of ufology, and it inspired the star map in the film Prometheus. I had never seen Prometheus, but now I kind of want to watch it just to see this map. She would describe them with having large heads, large eyes, but a small mouth. And she would say they didn't speak. They didn't really use their mouths. They communicated not with words, but like thoughts. They knew what the leader was thinking, and they would follow without having any sounds come out of their mouths. And they wore fitted uniforms. If we remember back in the roadblock, they described these beings as having like military style suits, like soldiers. And they would end up separating her and Barney. And she would go into this room and it would direct her, not with words again. They would direct her, and she kind of, it was like a telepathic message or something, because they directed her to sit on this table with no words. She would describe the leader of the beings as tall. He was the leader not because he was giving demands. They never spoke. While she was in this room, they performed a medical exam, is how she described it. They would examine her limbs. One of the beings would go on to insert this like long string into her navel, into her belly button. She would describe that being painful to the point to where she would flinch. But when she was feeling that pain, the leader would go and stand next to her head, and he would lift his arm up. That action would take away and ease her pain. Betty saw that as almost like a kind gesture. This was them saying, we're not here to hurt you. Put her at ease. It, in that moment in time, made her feel somewhat safe. Betty would go on to ask the leader, where are y'all from? He would point to this like empty space on their aircraft, and it would light up with all these different points. And all the points had these solid straight lines that would connect them, kind of like the map that Betty drew during hypnosis. Betty would continue to ask questions. They wouldn't answer her verbally, but the answers would come to her. Who knows how, but she would get answers to her questions. During her hypnosis, she would state that while they were in this spacecraft, she saw Barney also getting a medical exam by a different group of beings. And that's kind of how Betty's hypnosis sessions would be. She would have lots of details, and she would try to remember everything that happened. Now, we know that Barney wouldn't have these vivid dreams. And when Betty would talk to Barney about these dreams, we know that he was very kind of dismissive. He was respectful of them, but he would also tell himself, these aren't answers. These are just dreams. He almost, like I said, wanted to just forget about all of this. He wanted to put it past him. He was becoming very isolated. He wasn't speaking as much, and he was just kind of distancing himself. Betty was sure that these dreams she was having were unlocked memories, and Barney was losing track. He almost thought like he was losing the sense of knowledge and how the world worked. It was really affecting him mentally, and you can see that throughout time period of them trying to figure out what happened. Barney was slowly mentally deteriorating. So now we'll move on to Barney's hypnosis session. Now, his hypnosis session was really when we heard from his side of the story. The psychiatrist is trying to get Barney to relax, and he's counting down and he's saying, you'll fall asleep, you won't feel anxious, and you won't feel distressed. Within a few minutes, he starts getting emotional and really shaken when he's going back to talk about the very first time he saw the craft. When he walked across the road, he's describing how he felt and what he was seeing. He would go on to describe the craft as looking like a pancake. He would ask himself, what do they want? What do they want? Like in an angry, trying to get answers. What do you want? He would describe one of the beings he saw as being friendly. He seemed friendly. He was smiling at me. He described him as like a redhead Irishman. And this is when the psychiatrist asks, why do you describe them that way? And he would go on to say, because Irishmen usually are hostile towards Black African American men. Barney would go on to say that they were speaking to him. And the psychiatrist would ask, how do you know they're saying something to him? Because if we remember, Betty said they weren't talking. Their lips wouldn't move. They wouldn't use their mouths. They were kind of just communicating through thoughts. And Barney's like, I saw their mouths moving. That's how I know they were talking to me. They were saying something. These beings would tell Barney, just stay there and keep looking. Stay there and keep looking. Barney would say he felt like they were in his brain, and he would plead with the psychiatrist, can I please just wake up? Can I wake up? And the psychiatrist would say, just relax and stay asleep. He would also talk about Dulcie, which we haven't really heard much about, the dog. He would say Dulcie was just sitting there in the car, in the back seat, not barking, not making any noises, but his ears were perked up. It was alert, probably scared as well. He starts talking about his medical exam and how his eyes were closed. And he kind of almost told himself just to keep my eyes closed. I just need to keep my eyes closed. He would describe being laid on the table and that the zipper on his pants were unzipped, and how these beings would place like a cup under his private area. Part of him thought, if I just lay here and be quiet, this will end and they won't harm me. He was trying to reassure himself, like, just don't look, stay still, be quiet and calm, and you will be okay.
And I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared.
It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now.
I want to wake up.
You're not going to wake up. You're in deep sleep. You're comfortable, relaxed. This is not going to trouble you. You can remember everything now.
It's right over my right. God. What is it? And I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared.
It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now.
I got to get my gun.
All right. All right, that's all. Stop. Go to sleep, Steve. You forget now. You forget it now. You've forgotten. Calm now. Relax.
Not only was he kind of describing the opposite, some things were opposite of what Betty was saying, but also this is the most he's ever said about what happened. And he was scared. He was emotional. He wanted to wake up. He didn't want to be under hypnosis. So something important to note, after both Betty and Barney's hypnosis session, Barney does start to feel better. He feels like relieved, like he got this thing that he was holding on to off his chest. He starts returning back to his normal routines, his normal daily schedules. It's like a sense of relief for Barney. He stops grinding his teeth at night. His mood starts to improve. Betty, on the other hand, would dive deeper into her convictions. Her hypnosis session confirmed everything that she had already believed. It just was a confirmation for her. And she knew that these memories were something that actually did happen to her. All these dreams that she was having, they were actual lost memories. So we're gonna go back a little bit to the beginning and talk about the physical evidence that came home with them that night. The very following night, after they returned from their trip, Betty was looking at the blue dress she was wearing that night. She was kind of running her fingers through it, and she felt that it was hardened. It was stiff. It wasn't the soft, cozy fabric, and it had tears and rips along the end seams, and there seemed to be this powder on it, and she was just so confused as to how the dress got in that condition. She didn't do anything to cause that much damage to her dress. And meanwhile, Barney began to examine the shoes he was wearing that night. Barney was a very clean, sophisticated, well put together guy, and he was looking at his shoes, and they were scuffed and scratched and filled with dirt, and he was confused as to how that happened. Like, it almost felt to him as if someone was dragging him to cause all the scuff and the scratches that were on top of the shoe. Mind you, all the dirt that was on the bottom, they didn't go on an extreme hike. They didn't walk through mud or dirt for his shoes to be that dirty. He couldn't recall how they got in that condition. There was so many pieces of that night that were unknown and a mystery. They kept discovering and noticing little odd things that just didn't make sense. They didn't have any explanation. Like Betty's watch. Her watch had stopped working at 3:07 a.m. Just stopped working for whatever reason. Betty began journaling all these things again. She was writing every single thing down. As time went on, Betty would go back to her dress. And she picked it up and was looking at it again and noticed this pink powder on her dress. It was shimmery, and you would hold it up to the light and it would glimmer. And so she decided to shake her dress off, and this powder would fall off. And Betty then would gather the powder and put it inside a jar. Then there was the car they were driving that night, a 1957 Chevy Bel Air. There was no external damage to the car, but when Barney opened the trunk of the car, he noticed these spots, these circles on the interior of the car in the trunk that weren't there before. He touched one of the spots, but it wasn't sticky, it didn't smudge or anything like that. Betty had the idea to grab her compass again and noticed as she placed it closer to the trunk, it would go crazy again. And the last time she used her compass, she would place it on top of the white prints that were on the car in the trunk. This time she placed it inside of the trunk and it went crazy again. And she noticed whenever she would move it away from the trunk, it would recalibrate and work properly. But as she moved it closer to the trunk, it started to go crazy again. It seemed as if there was some type of magnetic interference with the compass and these circles and spots. That would lead Betty to go on and contact the director of the aerial phenomenon and the investigator that she had spoke to before. The investigator would go on and hear her story, and he would conclude that she was being sincere. She was telling the truth. The investigator would then go on to take photos of all the evidence of the dress, their watches, the car, even the compass. And as time went on, Barney began to develop these like circular patches on his skin and would get like these small wart-like looking things near his groin. If we remember when Barney was abducted and they were doing the medical exam on Barney, they did place a cup near Barney's groin area. And the doctors were confused about these wart things that Barney had. They didn't know what they were. They couldn't clearly identify them, which would cause Barney a lot of extra anxiety. Barney would become more withdrawn as time went on, and knowing that he had these things on his body that no one knew what they were. Barney also would go on to develop a fear of falling asleep in the dark. He could no longer sleep in a dark room. He needed some form of light, whether it was a night light, the bathroom light on, the hallway light on. He could not fall asleep in the complete darkness. Betty would go on to continue her research. She would also go on to read stories of others, of the experiences and what others had witnessed. What she would read would make her even more disturbed. She would read that others felt as if there was this missing time that was unaccounted for as well, similar to her story. But none of these other people had the same amount of physical evidence that they had. They had tangible items from that night with evidence and residue and random spots and developing things on their skin. No one else had that. There was fragments all over their home from that night. For nearly 4 years, Betty and Barney's story would remain pretty private. They only shared this information with close friends and family and the director of aerial phenomenon. And of course, their hypnosis, their neurologist. But in October of 1965, that would all change. There was a leak, a short newspaper article that would be published by the Boston Traveler. The article was titled, "The UFO Chiller. Was a Couple Seized?" And that drew immediate attention, which would describe Betty and Barney Hill's story along with the physical evidence. And at that point, everyone in New England knew who they were. Barney was very uncomfortable with all the exposure. He didn't want that. He didn't like that life. He was very private. He was being asked to relive the trauma of that night in front of television screens, audiences, in interviews with strangers. He began to fear rejection, and he thought, what would my colleagues think? What would the people at the post office think of me? He would be labeled as the man that saw aliens. Betty, on the other hand, she leaned into it. She was articulate, accurate, and passionate. She felt like it was her responsibility to share her story, to share her truth. The contrast between Betty and Barney became more obvious, especially when they were on television during interviews. Betty would speak very freely and with her emotions, while Barney kind of sat there quietly. He wouldn't say much unless a question was directed at him. UFO investigators would debate their story. One would call the abduction the most credible abduction ever. And even the New York Times would go on to write an article about it. They had their fair share of skeptics. I mean, even today, there's still skeptics on this topic. And they would feel as if Betty wanted this attention. She was fabricating the story and exaggerating the story for attention. In 1966, they blew up again with the release of their book. The book was a collaboration between Betty, Barney Hill, and the doctor that performed the hypnosis sessions. The book would contain actual transcripts of their full hypnosis. And then the calls came rushing in from universities, from television shows, from the media. And after the book, there came a rush of UFO sightings in the Northeast that were being reported. The FBI would go on to suggest that it was a mass media manipulation. Betty believed that the officials, these UFO pros, she felt as if they knew more than they were leading on. She knows that they knew, and they did know. With their images and their story now being everywhere, Barney's health did start to decline. He would develop high blood pressure and ulcers. And let me tell you, if you've never had an ulcer, those things are very, very painful. These ulcers were caused by the heavy amount of stress he was enduring. And all these health issues with Barney just kept building and building and building. In 1969, just 3 years after their book was released, Barney Hill would pass away of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 46. R.I.P. Barney. Betty would continue on her journey to spread her truths. She would continue this journey alone. And as time went on, Betty's reputation was being questioned because Betty would go on to report more and more sightings. And even those who supported Betty were at one point becoming skeptic and were questioning her. But Betty never wavered from her original story. It was always the same, and she would go full force with her story every single time, and every single time it was exactly the same. She never told her experience in 1961 any differently. Betty spent so much time telling everyone about her story. Still, none of these UFO professionals, investigators, directors, no one would validate her. And even after all of that, Betty and Barney Hill were still the very first to talk about their experience, to discuss alien abduction. They were the first to make people wonder and curious. Are they real? Do aliens exist? Are there UFOs out there flying in the sky or walking on the ground? People were wondering, they were curious, and honestly kind of scared. What is kind of sad is that Barney never wanted this. He never wanted to be a public figure. He never wanted to be famous, infamous, well known. He didn't want anyone to know everything about his life, his experiences. He never wanted any of that. He was always very reserved. He kept to himself. He was very private. He tried, after all of this happened, he tried to live a normal life. He would return to his job at the post office, and those close to Barney during those final days would describe him as being haunted. This haunted Barney. It scared him. It would ultimately lead to all his health issues. Betty would continue to live in the home that they both shared. She would go on to become a public figure in the UFO community. She became an activist. She never doubted herself, and she always just wanted to share her truth, her story, her experience. Their encounter was solid. It never changed. And I feel like something like what they experienced would be really hard to fabricate. They had physical evidence. They had all these strange things happening. They felt like they were always being watched and followed. They had these internal feelings, and you can hear it in the hypnosis tapes, the emotion. Something like that can't really be made up. In the early 2000s, Betty would step away from public appearances. Her health began to decline and she was diagnosed with cancer in her early 80s. Betty would go on to pass away on October 17, 2004, at the age of 85. So she really outlived Barney. And I think that all the stress and anxiety and everything that was going on with Barney's health was because of this. Their experience caused a lot of health issues for Barney, and Betty was more open about it. And I believe that's also what helped her live a lot longer. She didn't care what people thought about her. She didn't care if they believed her. She didn't really care what they said. She was always sticking to her truth. After this, the UFO phenomenon would blow up everywhere. There was alien talk, UFOs, there was films being made, there was all kinds of things. Roswell was everywhere. Their legacy remains till this day. They were pioneers. They were the first to speak about this publicly in a book. They did hypnosis sessions. They were the very first to even utter the word alien abduction. Something interesting is that Betty's dress, the blue dress that she was wearing the night of the occurrence, it was kept preserved in a box, and it would later be analyzed in 2019 by a private research group using scanning electron microscopy. They did confirm the presence of unusual substance on the dress. It was a staining and possible chemical residue. But that's all they really said about the dress. My question would be, why didn't they say what that chemical residue was, where it came from? Do we have a year on planet Earth, or is it an unknown chemical residue? They don't go on to explain that. There's so many more questions I have and wish I could talk to Betty and Barney Hill. I completely believe their story. I believe this did happen to them. I have had my own personal experiences, which maybe later on in a different episode I'll share about my experience, but I do believe we're living amongst others. It's not just us. Thank you guys so much for listening. It means so much to me. I would love if you guys would subscribe and just leave comments. I love interacting with y'all, and I want to hear y'all's thoughts and y'all's opinions on Betty and Barney Hill, the first ever documented alien abduction. Have a good night, guys. Stay safe out there.